This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 433, Drupal 10 Masterclass. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we're talking about the Drupal 10 Masterclass book, how it's different from other Drupal books, and why you need it on your bookshelf with author Adam Bergstein. We'll also cover Dashboard as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Adam Bergstein, longtime Drupal community member that's done modules, speaking, governance, and now authoring a book. Currently serving at Red Hat, leading engineering efforts for their developer portfolio that spans local tooling, developer catalog, and CI/CD capabilities. Adam, welcome back to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here again and see some familiar faces.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-host is Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
Happy to be here.
And now to talk about the module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to add a dashboard to your Drupal site to provide at-a-glance information to editors? There's a module for that. Its full name is Dashboards with Layout Builder, and it was created in November of 2019 by Eric Seifert of 1x Internet. It has 2.0.8 and 2.1.6 versions available, the latter of which works with Drupal 9 and 10. It is actively maintained and has test coverage, and it currently has 13 open issues, 5 of which are bugs on the 2.1.x branch. It's also currently in use by 1,878 sites, according to Drupal.org. And really, the module works by allowing for the creation of dashboards as exportable config entities using Layout Builder to define the layout and placement of blocks. It's possible to create unique dashboards per user. And out of the box, you get a number of dashboard components to embed views, show recent errors, display content from RSS feeds, and more. Dashboard components are also defined using a new plugin base, so you can create custom components to meet the unique needs of your site. The dashboards are also optimized for use with the Gin Admin theme, which isn't a surprise because 1x Internet is also a sponsor of Gin. If your site is using Gin, then this module will provide a central dashboard that will seamlessly integrate with your backend UI. Now, if you're looking to implement dashboards on your site, you can also look at Moderation Dashboard and Homebox as other options. The latter of those is even more widely used, but mostly by D7 sites, although one of those sites is Drupal.org. So if your team is active on Drupal.org, then the interface will be instantly familiar for them. There is also a dashboard initiative that has been started by some core maintainers. So using one of the modules that we've just mentioned can set you up to weigh in on what the ideal state of that initiative might look like. So let's talk about dashboards with Layout Builder.
I'm curious about one thing with this dashboard because, one of the things that I always have to kind of wrap my mind around or remember when I'm creating a dashboard is this meant more for a user to configure some of their things themselves, kind of like the Drupal.org one, where you can kind of drag and drop and reorder, or is it just a general dashboard? Because for most clients, a static dashboard that you build with views, I say static, but a dashboard that's the same for most people that uses views to dynamically update is sufficient. But sometimes sometimes users need more flexibility. It sounds like with the plugin base, this is more of the latter. Like it gives your users the tools to kind of configure their dashboard themselves. Am I understanding that correctly?
So I don't know for sure to what degree it's set up to allow users to sort of drag and drop on their own. As you say, like Homebox is basically,
Yep.
What gives that capability on Drupal.org. It does mention on the project page the ability to have sort of, per user type dashboards, but I don't know if the intent there is really to allow users to do that themselves or if it's just because you can create as many of those dashboard config entities as you need, that you can sort of set those up, and then the users kind of have whatever they need specifically. But certainly, if there are any listeners who have experience using this module, it would be great to have some input there in terms of how this module works and how it compares to some of those other options.
I mean, I imagine it's probably pretty useful if you're, kind of building, going back to our show last week, right? If you're building a portal or some sort of community site where you wanted to give people a nice dashboard when they logged in, that was kind of configurable by them, like this would definitely help you get there, I imagine. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I think really the intent is to sort of, as soon as you log in, you can sort of see things like, what content is in moderation, have links to, create popular kinds of like content types and some of those kinds of things. So really make it a sort of a better starting point than, like the user page as an example, when you first log in, right? Having useful information so that right out of the gate, you can do some useful things as opposed to having to like click off to some kind of a different interface.
Anything feels more useful than knowing how long I've been a member of the site for. Just throwing that out.
I think it seems to me that it does inherently still leverage a lot of the same underlying dynamic content. Like if you have stuff tied to blocks and content types, you probably get the permissions and people can see what's more relevant for them and stuff. So if it's engineered well, which I haven't tested it or used it, but like it would seem to suggest that you could configure kind of a high level view of what a dashboard is, but then get all the benefits of like the dynamic content stuff under the hood, which could hit a whole bunch of different use cases or be more targeted for specific users or whatever, right? So yeah.
User specific personalization. It's the future. It's the future. And now you can do it with dashboards.
I will say I first heard about this module was actually a thread, I think, in the Gin admin theme, where there was discussion about dashboards, and that's where it was brought up. So it's one that I've been wanting to dig into a little bit. I probably have, certainly on Drupal.org experience using Homebox, but in terms of some of the sort of day-to-day development, I've probably worked with Moderation Dashboard more than this one, but definitely interested, the layout builder, leveraging that as opposed to some sort of, custom or bespoke kind of, JavaScript for the placement of those things, obviously makes perfect sense in the Drupal world.
I might actually try this out in the next few weeks for a couple of commerce clients that I have, because I feel like that's the kind of information that's really helpful for, like quick links to see, even just a quick way to see what's sold recently, a quick way to get to variations, because while I understand the reason for the distinction between variants and products in commerce, and I know why it's the default, it is sometimes so jarring for clients to, because most simple commerce sites have a one-to-one relationship between variants and products. But if you have an easy way to just get to the variant directly, that might be helpful too, rather than having to dig a little bit deeper. So I'll probably try this out for that client, a couple of those clients in the next few weeks, and report back once I've done that.
All right. Well, as per the usual, this has been a very, very interesting module, and I look forward to hearing more about Nick's dashboard escapades in future episodes. Thanks a lot, Martin. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, there has been a lot of discussion around Drupal 7's official end of life in January 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on Drupal 7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible. This is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with core team maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain their Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7 Never-Ending Support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own time, or potentially not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep D7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7 never-ending support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com. Okay, Adam. So you wrote a book. It is called Drupal 10 Masterclass. There's a little bit more there. What's the rest of the title?
Build responsive Drupal applications to deliver custom and extensible digital experiences to users. I would say that's more of a subtitle, but the main title of the book is
Drupal 7 Masterclass. Cool.
Drupal 7, not Drupal
all right,
7.
Sorry, not Drupal 7. That's silly. Drupal 10. We'll edit that in post. No, we won't. They love to highlight my mistakes. Okay. So just give us kind of an overview of what the book's about, kind of what topics does it cover, kind of at a high level.
Yeah. So the motivation I had really in writing the book actually was to give a fairly broad overview of everything Drupal, right? Especially from the perspective of Drupal 10, not really looking back into 7 or 6 or earlier, right? But looking at Drupal 10 is a forward-looking thing. It's really designed to be a very broad stroke look that is, for people that are new to Drupal, new to building applications. It's not very technically deep. It doesn't assume a lot of, deep technical knowledge of coding or, different standards or anything. So it's really fairly, like I said, fairly high level, but also like targeting beginners who, in my view, that was really what my motivation was, was to try to help get, more community members, help provide a tool, a book that could help people get, from nothing to something in their Drupal career as fast as possible, right? Covering as many topics, as I could cover reasonably within a book, but also acknowledging that those topics are not covered with a level of depth. There's several other books and things that are out there in the world that, cover module development or theme development or, views even, like, that go into much deeper, piece of information around those specifics, right? This is broad and it covers topics everywhere, ranging from like, what is the community and what is Drupal, to views, to content types, to structured content, to layout builder, to multilingual. I would say I even, it's not even just explicitly the features of Drupal, but how do you actually maintain a Drupal site? How do you deploy code, and how do we look at like the infrastructure that Drupal runs on as, different DevOps concepts and things like that. So really kind of giving people a very broad stroke about like, okay, yes, this is what Drupal is, but also here's how you use it, install it, maintain it, support it. Here's how you engage with the community. Here's the kind of terminology you're going to be expected to see and learn, and you talk to other community members and everything like that. So
almost like an owner's manual, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you just bought a new Drupal site. Here's your owner's manual. Read it. Read through it. I'm wondering, you say that it covers a lot of topics, which is awesome. And it goes into some of those topics at different levels. The topics that you kind of don't maybe go as deep into, are there recommendations here for other sources of information to kind of get deeper into something if somebody wants to get deeper into something?
I mean, absolutely, right? Even inside of the book, especially those that read the electronic copy will get the benefits of various links and things that are inside of the book, whether they're to Drupal.org pages or maybe, other websites, like even learning about Composer, learning about Git, right? That you can go and read their own existing documentation online. I did motivationally try not to, be too specific about like, oh, hey, go read this other book, or go buy, this product that solves this problem over here, only because this book was not done to sort of benefit any specific commercial entity or anything like that. But this was really, more of just helping somebody, who could be fresh off the street, really wanting to like learn what Drupal is, learn what the best practices are, et cetera, and the concepts that are going to, help drive more depth later.
So I wanted to ask a little bit more about audience, because you talked a little bit about who you have this for. And I have two specific questions. One, we were recently asked by somebody who was really familiar with Drupal 7 kind of coding and backend development, and they're looking to kind of get back into it with Drupal 10. Is this a good resource to kind of get them up to speed on what's changed? I mean, I know it's not explicitly what's new in Drupal 10, but is this a good resource to get up to speed on what's new in Drupal 10 if you're familiar with
Yeah,
previous
there
versions?
is a chapter for that. Yeah, and I would say a lot of it comes down to focusing on the various features and the dependencies that have been updated for Drupal 10. What to expect of like what's being built inside of Drupal 10. What's even the release philosophy of between major releases now? Because I think even people that have come from, the days of like Drupal 4, 5, 6, 7, and switching from 7 to 8, everyone knows, hey, that's a pretty big, update.
Yep.
Now they're doing like rolling updates and like rolling releases and doing deprecation schedules and whatnot. So, it's a little bit talking about how does that work and how do new features come in and how do those things kind of evolve. So yeah, there's an entire chapter that's really focused on that to kind of help, ground
Okay.
people. But I think it would all depend on what that person's journey is, right? I would say someone that's really interested in learning like the depth of like say module development might benefit more from like Matt Glauman's book, that he wrote with Kevin, I believe, and
Yep.
that is focused on module development specifically. Same with maybe someone that might want to do theming is another good one. There's definitely theming books that are out there. So I would say it's really dependent on someone's journey, but my motivation was truly to like provide a very comprehensive survey of all things Drupal related to
Yep.
Drupal 10. Yeah.
So on a related note, it sounds like the primary audience is new people and more non-technical people getting into the Drupal world. I'm curious how you address how do you address like composer and hosting? Because I think those are two, again, I'm going back to Drupal 7. I don't know why, but in general, I think Drupal from a developer's perspective has been getting better and better each version. But one thing that's become more difficult when you're onboarding as a less technical person, especially, is just getting started. Drupal generally assumes you need to have Composer. Drupal nowadays, generally, you have to host with a Drupal specific host, right? Whereas before, you could just set up a cPanel, one-click install. How does your book address kind of that level of getting started?
Absolutely. I think the way it addresses it is not specific to like a Drupal host. It's not specific to a different offering. It talks about concepts. I talk a lot about versioning code. I
Okay.
provide sample Git commands on how to do that. Like I talk about Composer. I talk about running Composer update and using Composer require to load another project, and I provide specific examples inside of the book that sort of more pragmatically show
Okay.
people like, hey, this is how you do this, but like you might have to substitute your own project name in here, or you might have to run this. And I talk a lot about also like I would say this book is maybe a little heavier in like something like more DevOps practices that hits on code deployments and best
Okay.
practices and code updates and things of that nature. So we do talk a lot about Git and Drush, and we do that through the framing of like environments. Like it's not assuming an environment in terms of like who's offering it or what
Hmm.
features exist, by a product, but just talking about how hey, it's really important for you to have a development environment so that you can push code changes and stage content and the database and the files down from the source of truth in production, right? So those things are broached in the book in terms of things that you should probably understand if you're doing Drupal development and running a Drupal site, because it's important to have a good way to test code changes. And it's an open source community. You might if you have a lot of custom code on your Drupal application, you may run into some surprises by just running a basic code update, not by any fault of the community or anything like that,
Yeah.
but just, it's not a perfect system, right? It's not, it's never been designed that way, nor should it be, right? So I talk a lot about how do you test that code properly? How do you deploy that? How, what are the considerations of a multi-environment setup? And,
Okay.
and so, yeah, I hit a lot on that throughout the book, actually. And really trying to kind of get people set up in terms of really what are the kinds of best practices that people should be trying to drive towards as they're looking at, their Drupal journey and learning about it. Yeah.
So, my next question, don't take it as a negative.
Of course.
I would like in my career goals, my trajectory, I'm never in my head said, you know what? I'm going to write a book. That sounds like a road of pain for me. So I'm wondering, why did you write this book? And I kind of want to frame this in two ways, right?
Mhm.
One, like, why did you write it for the community, right? And then the two, why was this a career goal of yours? Was this something where somebody just said, "Hey, we have an idea for a book, and you seem like a guy that could write it"? So I'll leave it there. Why write this book?
I mean, you hit on a lot of different things. So I would say I was approached by the publisher to write the book.
Okay.
I did not. I had a lot of discretion on what the topics of the book were and how how it would be written. They put a lot of faith in my experience to be able to do that. But I didn't have to go through, like, I would say, a conventional process where somebody has an idea for a book and they have to pitch it to a publisher and do things. I did not have to go through that, which is great. I was kind of recruited to do this, but I don't know if that necessarily like answers your question exactly. It's more personally for me. I would say I've always wanted to write a book. That's like been on my bucket list. Now,
All right.
and it just is kind of like, I don't know, I could probably just say personally, it's like, oh, I just enjoy learning new things and trying new things, and this was in that space of stuff that I kind of challenged myself to figure out, right? And it was no trivial task. I mean, obviously when you have full-time job and family and everything, you end up having a lot of commitments. So this was not a small venture for me, and so it took about 15 or so months to write the book and get through all the chapters. It's over 300 pages. And so, yeah, it was, and then it had editorial and working on all the, introductory content and appendices and everything. Just, it was a lot of work, but it's something I can look back and say, hey, yeah, I did that. And my motivation for doing it, I actually was thinking about this a bit before. If you kind of think about some of my Drupal journey, it's not just really been all that technical, if I'm being honest with you.
Mhm.
I helped to lead the governance task force that was really looking at like the community at large and trying to like evaluate the health of the community in different ways, that were more certainly at a time where a lot of community members were questioning if our governance was where it needed to be and things of that nature. And
Mhm.
we wrote that very lengthy report, through a committee that we put together, trying to hit on where our governance was falling short, right? And
Okay.
with some concrete recommendations.
Mhm.
And then you look at something like Simply Test Me, right? That whole effort and motivation, even though us that were, creating it, building it, maintaining it, were doing technical work. The motivation of doing that was not for exclusively for people who were doing deep technical coding and things like that. You could obviously
Mhm.
test patches and do stuff like that, so it could be very useful in that regard. But Simply Test Me, and it as its core motivation, is a whole system that's designed to lower the learning curve of Drupal, right?
Mhm.
give people a way to test Drupal, use Drupal, try projects out, configure it, and do it in a way that you don't have to know Drush or install instances or host it or any of that stuff, right?
Mhm.
So it's a pretty nice, safe place to do that. So a lot of like, I would say my journey in Drupal alone kind of reflects exactly where I landed with the book. You know, I had an opportunity to kind of serve the community in a unique way. It absolutely was something I wanted to do over time. You know, when you have younger kids, I'm not sure it's a great choice to do it whenever you're really busy, like running to soccer practice and, you know, going to swimming, and then you have a snow day, right? You know, you have all these things that come up organically. But it was a unique and kind of fun venture to help out. Yeah.
So I'm going to go out on a limb there and say you answered my question perfectly. And it's interesting to me that you liken the book to your Drupal journey, because as you were describing that, it kind of clicked for me as to what I could expect when reading the book. And for me, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken here, but to me, like, it sounds like this book is making Drupal more accessible to people, right? And more specifically, more accessible to maybe a non-technical developer focused audience, right?
I'd say that's accurate. Yeah. I mean, you know, very much like Simply Test Me, I think the book affords an opportunity to, you know, lower the learning curve for those that might want to learn about Drupal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So the subtitle, build responsive Drupal applications to deliver custom and extensible digital experiences to users, is a bit of a mouthful, but it
That's like
also,
the subtitle. Like I just
yeah.
call it Drupal 10 Masterclass. Like yeah, like it is a bit of a mouthful, but like I know the other books have subtitles too. You don't have to
Yeah.
use the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious about the application piece of it, because it kind of, and I agree with this point of view, but I'm curious about your perspective. It makes Drupal sound a little bit more than a CMS. Can you talk a little bit about that? You know, why you chose that subtitle?
I guess in my opinion, it reflects my understanding of Drupal better. I've never really looked at Drupal as purely a CMS. You know, I probably because I'm a bit of a dinosaur, right? Whenever I look at historical CMSs, I even remember the days of, you know, using like flat file based CMS systems. You know, like that was kind of maybe when I started dabbling in these areas, right? Where, you know, you might
Yeah.
have like a different piece of software. It even ran on your desktop, and it would go and like re-render, reproduce HTML sort of on the fly, and then crank that over via FTP to some server somewhere that, you know, was serving up files, right? Like that's where I kind of like learned stuff, even though my background is in programming and computer science. But, you know, when I look at Drupal though, like, you know, I think people always sell it short. It's really, it has its core features are focused a lot on content management and the practices there, which are great and super useful for people. But it has a very robust development framework. It can be extensible through countless use cases, even just offered by the community alone, right? Through
Yeah.
Drupal.org. And I think, especially as like from a selling or sort of buyer's perspective, you know, like there's a lot of confusion, I think, about just pitching Drupal as a CMS. It's like, oh yeah, it can do content management. You can configure it where there's different roles and personas, and yes, you can use it like that. But there's the operations of running a Drupal site. And the minute you frame it or make it, you know, position it as an application, people understand that it is a living and breathing thing. It has hosting and it has a database and it has code that needs to be up to date because it's an application, right? So I think
Yeah.
people resonate better with that. That's been my experience when working with people that use Drupal, and you know that they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I think I get that better, right? And it also helps to validate some of the dynamic aspects of things, like, you know, the fact that you could do web forms and it sends an email and stuff. It's actually a running system, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I frame it in the way that I do.
It's interesting because when I read it a couple of times because I was kind of like, what's this subtitle all about, right? And I don't know, it grabs me in like two different ways, right? You read build responsive Drupal applications and you're like, whoa, this book is going to be super technical and like, oh my god, I don't even know what Drupal is. And then applications, that sounds like a lot. And then it's to deliver custom and extensible digital experiences to users. And I'm like, man, every marketer that sees the title of this book is going to just glaze right over that first part and go like, I need to deliver custom and extensible digital experiences. How do I do it, Adam? Tell me. So it's interesting. It's interesting to me. And I think, I think you're the way that you describe Drupal just now is something many people agree with. I often say, and listeners are like, listen, we know what you're going to say, just don't say it. But like, Drupal's kind of like the glue, right? It can do a lot of different things and can bring together a lot of different systems to build that kind of custom experience. So
agreed.
Let's talk a little bit about how the book differs from some of the other books that have recently come out. So we already talked about the Drupal 10 Development Cookbook by Matt Glauman and Kevin Quinlan. There's also Modernizing Drupal 10 Theme Development by Luca Lusso. We have episodes on both of those books, 406 and 425. Link will be in the show notes for our listeners. I'm wondering, like, how you, I don't want to assume. Have you read both of those books?
I have not. I've read, I do have Matt and Kevin's book. I'm also not a themer by trade. So even in my own book, I recruited Mike Herschel to write the chapter on theming because of my really lack of confidence, honestly, that I'd be able to hit the topic in a good way, right? And I do have Matt's book, and that's obviously great. I've like read parts of it, namely whenever, even as I was kind of writing my book, just to kind of help frame some of the other ways that he was thinking about things. And he's a super sharp dude, very smart, right? So, it was good kind of motivation as I was kind of looking at stuff as well. But I would say like they're just very different books. Like they're extremely different. Those books that you mentioned really are very heavy depth books, in my opinion.
Okay.
Even the cookbook, tends to kind of go through like specific solutions of stuff and how they build it and code different things. And I found that to be very insightful, more from a problem solving perspective. The theming book, I would imagine, is much deeper on theming, right? Like more depth and around that CSS, JavaScript libraries, creating themes, constructs there, Twig, etc. All of which I think, I definitely, we have that in the book that I have. There's probably some degree of overlap, but the purpose of my book is more of an overview. So it's really giving people the kind of like hook to get into what they might want to get into. And giving them some resources, some clues, some ways they can search Google or kind of figure out what their next steps might be. Yeah.
Any other sources of inspiration that you kind of used for your book?
I will say too that like, I always kind of draw from like Drupal.org and from the community at large, blog posts and things as I'm like reading stuff. And I've done that my entire time in Drupal. Had nothing to do with really reading or writing the book per se. But you'd be floored by how much better, even back when, say, I started my journey learning about the Drupal community and whatnot. Like I was really taken back by how much better the content on Drupal.org, the documentation has become over the years. I give those folks a ton of credit for how well they've evolved it. But just the community at large, you're reading all these great blog posts, even things on like migrations, was one that I had to, kind of do a lot of studying and kind of, it'd been a while since I had done a migration. Even the systems and tools inside of Drupal have come such a long way. So I had to do a lot of background studying. I'm like reading individual blog posts. I'm like pulling down certain modules. Yeah. So major props to, even the community at large. It just has done such great things, and they're sharing their knowledge and their code and all that stuff, freely and willingly, right?
Yeah, we'd also be remiss if we didn't mention Selwyn Pollitt's kind of living book. I think he's referring to it as Modern Drupal now, but we've recorded episode 398 on Drupal at your fingertips, and that's a great kind of resource on individual kind of concepts as well. Just want to throw that one in there too.
I guess like, sorry, I just had a great idea, which somebody can steal if they like, but like, if going back to my previous question about why you wrote the book, like if I were going to write a book, it would literally just be that. It would be like curated thoughts and snippets from other people's stuff. It literally would not be like, other than like, commentary and funny musings. It would literally just be a bunch of other people's stuff. So there you go.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think you would find plenty of material, within the community. I can certainly vouch for that. It's weird when you're writing a book, you have to write it. It's not, you're not like, plagiarizing stuff from other people. Mine's more like, when I wrote it, it's like, okay, hey, I've like used all that stuff as motivation, learned from it myself, and then had to write my own part for it, right? Like, and doing so, it's kind of like, I also reflected significantly on like my experience around doing these things. And I was astonished by how many different things I've actually done, in the last, God knows, 15 some years or whatever, doing this type of stuff. Like, things just kind of really came and spoke to me as I was writing stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I should really like, mention, this best practice that I try to stick to, and so the book is one part, all these motivations. It's another part, like my hands-on experience of kind of doing things. And when you kind of break things down, even from a beginner perspective, like you'd be surprised. Like I was like writing stuff, that I had experienced ages ago, right? That I'm just like, oh, I totally forgot about that. And like, man, that like I really should, like, I should say something about that, because boy, if I, had remembered that for, my past self, or if I would have known that, boy, that would have been useful, right? Yeah.
Can we dive in a little bit to the writing process? And this is one of my favorite parts of all the shows we do on books, because every author's experience is different. But what was your writing process? Were you in Word or some open source system? Were you in Git? Like, what was the writing process like for you?
So it's actually really funny, right? So because I was recruited by Pact, who's a publisher, they have their own fairly strict, process tools, what have you, right? And in doing so, I could tell you, like, I'll give you a really funny story. I don't even own a computer right now that has Microsoft Word on it. Like, I don't know if I've just like completely freed myself of like proprietary software. I don't know, but like, but their process was like, well, here's a Word doc template, and then every chapter that you start, you got to like copy this template, and then and here's all the guidelines for this, and you have to fill this out piece by piece, and then you submit it up to this SharePoint portal, and then you'll kick off the review process. And it was very like linear and sequential, and just kind of and a little bit antiquated from a tooling perspective. And I mean, I'm sure that's worked well for people that I guess live in that kind of world, but for me it was fairly problematic. I mean, most of my job and even personal life and everything, I make heavy use of Google Docs and things of that nature. So one thing that I convinced them to do was to basically like modernize their process. I'm like, hey, so what would you say about converting this Word doc template into a Google Doc template? And what would you say about making the chapters inside of a Google Drive and having the reviews more iterative, right? Instead of submitting them up and, checking a
Oh,
box and
interesting.
kicking off a workflow. It's like, well, what about if we like do on the fly reviews and we do editorial like right in the Google Doc and collaborate? And they were like, really? And I was like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And so we actually did that. And I could tell you that Rachel reviewed the book. She reviewed the chapters, and she was awesome to collaborate with. Just can't say enough great things about her involvement. Same with Herschel. And with Rachel, I just shared the Google Drive folder, and it was like within days I was getting just right inline comments, suggestions, cleaning up typos, right? All of those things, totally iteratively, right?
Yeah.
And that saved a ton of time. It was like much more efficient, much better process. So I like to believe I actually taught the publisher maybe a new way of looking at how to collaborate on these things. So some of which was I didn't want to buy Microsoft Word either. So
Sorry, before I have a follow-up question, but before we do, which Rachel are you referring to? That was helpful. Does she work for Pact
Drupal.org,
or?
Rachel Norfolk.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I-
Yep.
Okay.
Her name is Rachel Lawson, by the way. That is her formal name. Yeah, but
Okay.
she is very well known by her Drupal.org handle. So
Yeah, I'm familiar with Rachel. I just didn't know which Rachel you were referring to, and I'm sure our listeners had the same question. Um, I find that fascinating that you were able to work with Pact on that, because we've had a few Pact authors on, and that sounds like a very different process than they went through there. I think they
Isn't it?
were.
Sorry, isn't it Packet?
I guess it could be Packet. I don't know for sure.
there's no E, so I've always called them Pact. It's
Yeah.
PACKT. I may be wrong on that. So
All right. I might be wrong too. Anyway,
yeah.
continue on. Continue on, Nick. Continue on.
Maybe we could ask them. So we've had a few authors on that have published through Pact before, and they said that the process was a lot more rigid, and I think probably the biggest pain point that people mentioned was, one of them was Word, but that wasn't the biggest one. The biggest one was you had to submit each chapter in order, and once it was reviewed, you could never change it. So if you realized in chapter 6 that you really needed to introduce some concept in chapter 4, well, too bad. You had to figure out how to work around that. So if
We
you're
broke
allowed.
that process, pretty significantly. I mean, I through the writing process, I wholesale changed certain chapters, moved
Wow.
content around, completely gutted it, and the only time I reached that stage that you're describing was when there was like literally a proof of the book
Hmm.
that it was like, okay, if you really need to make any changes, like you catch something egregious or
Yeah.
really bad, something that you just totally forgot, then like you can suggest it, but you know
Yeah.
but that was about all at that point.
I, I'm curious about that, because I understand their perspective, wanting to do it the way that they did with most other authors, because it allows them to kind of work on the book piece by piece, rather than, oh, it's done, now we have 400 hours worth of work to do to lay it out. Um, but I think as far as like a better product, I think being able to modify it as you go works. Now, you said that it took 15 months of writing, or
Yeah.
15 months. Is that, from the moment they contacted you until it was for sale, or is that 15 months of you've decided to do it, you sat down, wrote chapter 1, and then you sent off the proof to them to actually lay out what's that timeline?
I mean, I think there was a lot of upfront planning that went into the book, having like an outline and writing the different like, subheaders and headings and things and like key topics and key learnings. That
Hmm.
took a long time, like to really flesh out. And I think that may have been the part of the process I probably liked the least, if I'm being honest, because like for me, I was far more comfortable learning parts as I was writing. Like for instance, like, you know, I was way more open to modifying a chapter completely or changing exactly like what contents or headings would be there, or even moving the order of chapters around arbitrarily. They still wanted me to work, you know, chapter by chapter and write them, and I think that was totally fine, you know. But I also made sure that we were not adherent to like not being able to go back and modify things, because if I did go and learn something like, oh, that'd be great for the views chapter, right? Like, you know, I really wanted to be able to go back and put that content in without, you know, like something that was super, super rigid in terms of like, oh, you can't
Yeah.
touch that anymore, right? You know, and I would say what makes that a little bit tricky is just more formal editorial. Like if they have to go back and re-review and do things. But guess what? Google Docs does that quite well. You could turn on suggestion mode and you could literally go in and they could see any changes you were making on the fly for any chapter, right? They could accept them, they could edit them, do whatever. And so they don't have to go back and re-review things. So I like to believe that the process that we used probably was a more modern and more effective way of doing things than they might have historically done. Yeah.
It's interesting to me because, like, again, never ever wanted to write a book, and you know, the idea that like you kind of build out that scaffolding, right, of the book before you actually write like paragraphs is like, you know, I kind of figured you were like, oh, I just jot down a table of contents and then like you're off to the races. But like to have like the table of contents, the subheadings, to have the like the, you know, the learnings from each chapter, like, hey, what are you going to get out of this beforehand, and be able to like write to that seems pretty interesting to me. And then the idea of like learning it as you go, I feel is like is a super interesting way to do that, because like there are always those great things as you're like digging into something that you're like, oh, and then there's this and then there's that, and it kind of, I don't know, it feels like it got you excited about kind of writing that section of the book at that point in time.
Yeah, it definitely was for sure. And I do think it did help prepare. Like I don't want to like, you know, when you do a lot of that upfront work, it is very good for grounding how you can organize your thoughts. Like it, you know, because it's like, oh, well, this one's on migration. Yeah, like we definitely need to hit like the sections of the YAML file. We have to hit the different modules that are involved and what they do and why they're important. And, you know, and hit some of the key community modules like migration tools and stuff that like pretty commonplace. Like, you know, it really helps kind of ground things. Also making sure that like, oh, I don't want to like, if I had discretion on where to put something, if I didn't prepare in advance, I might have forgotten. I might have put like the same content in a couple different chapters, right? You know, because sometimes things in Drupal tend to be a little bit more intertwined, right? So, you know, it was good for me to stay organized, right? But I would say I also, just maybe personally speaking, don't generally like or default to preparing that much. You know, I'm not that rigid about it, right? Like, you know, and I think that was maybe something that they, you know, I might have challenged them a bit as part of the process to kind of stretch them, saying, oh, no, I just went and modified this, you know, and they're like, what? You know,
it's interesting because it's like I liken it to like getting ready to do a presentation, right? Because that's kind of like how I roll, is like, hey, I'm going to go with an outline, and some of those points are going to be more fleshed out than others, and some of them are just going to kind of be like off the cuff remarks, right? So maybe that's my book idea. I could do a book on non-code contribution. I don't know. We'll see. What were you going to say, Nick?
I'm curious about how Google Docs worked. Did you run into any limits there? Because I know if you get, was it one chapter per document or something? Because I know once you get to a large number of revisions, things start to break down. I find Google Docs that have more than 15, 20 pages start to get really, really cumbersome.
Yeah. I would say
out?
each chapter was its own doc, you know, and it was like a clone of a chapter template. You know, and then they had other templates for stuff like introductory content and things of that nature, right? So, you know, each one kind of was a copy of one of the templates, chapter by chapter, you know, and each chapter, you know, it changed, the page length varies pretty drastically. You know, I think one of the shortest chapters is around like the multi-site feature, and that's like maybe, you know, 7 to 10 pages. And some of the larger ones are more like, you know, 25 to 30 or so, if I recall.
Yep.
You know, some have some images and things too that end up kind of adding a lot of bulk in terms of page content. But no, that I didn't struggle at all, really.
Okay.
I have, in a personal sense, I've seen that manifest when you have a very heavy number of collaborators that hit,
Yeah.
you know, a large number of pages and a large number of comments. You can watch the like spinny ball of death on your browser as you try to reload things, right? But in a general sense, no, like we didn't really hit any sort of
Okay.
scaling challenges around that. But I would say, like, you know, just the broader sense of features of turning on suggestion mode, leaving comments, making,
Yeah.
catching editorial things, like that was so like immensely valuable as part of like,
Yeah.
you know, just helping us be efficient. You know, that's, I would say, one of the struggles too in general. I would say like it, I think it it seems that maybe in a conventional sense, authors are kind of expected to like walk and chew gum. Like you're expected to keep writing more chapters, but then you're also expected to go back and clean up all the editorial and all the existing chapters and do that kind of simultaneously. Like, you know, I think for me, that was probably one of the harder parts of writing the book was, oh, okay, I'm just getting this pile up of like editorial stuff I need to go back and clean up in 3 or 4 different chapters. But meanwhile, I have this new chapter that's due, you know, say tomorrow, and I have to like, you know, get that done. And you know, just keeping on the schedule and the whole pace of everything was very hard, you know, with
Yep.
all the other commitments that I had. So, but overall, you know, I'm really happy to be done with that exercise, and I'm so glad it's published and I can see it in the world and other people can read it. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
That can be true as a developer too, though, right? You're pushing to put out new features, but also clean up, technical debt and that kind of thing. And it's a
absolutely.
balance. It's a balance. You want to get those technical reviews, whether the editorial or code, because you also, if it's a style thing that you can fix as you're writing the next chapter, well, that's less work for everybody for the next chapter too. So
Yep.
it's yeah, I can imagine that that's a tough balance to hit.
So Stephen bought the book today and added it to his goal of 50 books in 2024, which let's just pause right there for a second, because 50 books in a year is very admirable, Stephen. So when you're listening back to this, know that I'm very impressed by that, because I'll be lucky if I read 1 or 2 books in 2024. But wondering, he's got the book in his hands, he's getting ready to read it. What can he do to kind of get the most value out of the book? What is there any prerequisites that he should take in before reading the book?
None specifically come to mind. I mean, it is really designed for someone coming fresh off the street without any presumption of knowledge or background material. I mean, my best advice for Stephen would be to, you know, carve a path in the book that is more relevant for him. Like if you know, there's a series of chapters that all cover very specific topics, you know, and I would say, you know, pick those chapters that really speak to you, right? If there's areas that you don't feel as confident in, or you want to learn more, a little bit more about views, or you want to you know, read more about code deployments and DevOps and things like that, you'll probably find some good content more in specific chapters. The first, you know, there are sections of the book, you know, that are organized by you know, series of chapters grouped together, right? Those groupings kind of are logical too, like, you know, where the first grouping is around like true, like just getting grounded about Drupal. What is it and how does it work, and what's the community, and and like what are the really high level basics, right? I mean, so if you're like more intermediary or advanced, you probably don't need to read a lot of that, but there may be some bits of information that could be useful, or like, oh, I didn't think of things this way, or I didn't understand this best practice. But then the second group of chapters are really focused a lot on the specific features. Like, so if you're really good with content types, yeah, maybe you could skip the section on structured content, right? But maybe you want to dive into views, or you want to learn more about migration and what it is and how it could work. Like, those are great topics. And then the third is more what I would call advanced. Those advanced topics do span things like, hey, we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to learn a little bit more about Git and Composer, the backend, framework of developing a module, the concepts of developing a theme. We're going to hit those things, right? And give you like a good, path to kind of get more depth later. But there's code samples and like different snippets of things that you can like kind of grab and play around. So you can pick your journey in this book. I do believe that. That's how it was written too. It was written very specific around those topics in the outline. Like, every time I wrote a chapter, I would go in and just immerse myself in all the specifics around that specific thing, whether it was views or whatever.
Just out of curiosity there. So I'm reading a book by Michael Lopp, I think is his name. And he specifically starts the book by saying, like, listen, you do not have to read this in order. You do not have to read this in like at one time. Like, it's basically every chapter is a story of what I'm trying to communicate. And they are sectioned off into, I think, 3 or 4 sections, right? So it sounds like folks coming into Drupal 10 Masterclass could approach this in sort of the same way, where if they're like, hey, I want to read the views chapter, they could just read the views chapter. Do you recommend reading, them in order? Do you recommend reading them, as they make sense? And is it something where you could read like a chapter at a time, or is it like, hey, you should really read this section in its entirety to get the most out of it?
By the way, before I answer that, I've also read a lot of stuff by Michael Lopp. It's Rands, right? That's
yes. Yeah. So I'm reading.
He goes by Rands. Yeah.
I'm reading
phenomenal. Yeah.
I don't know. Another Mike Myers recommended one of his books. It's got a butterfly on the cover. Yep. It's about management. I recommend it.
Yes.
I'm still reading.
I highly recommend it too. Yeah. He also has a fantastic blog, by the way. So like I believe his books sometimes do mirror some of the way that he writes his blogs.
Yeah.
Or topics, and like his blog is phenomenal. I've learned a tremendous amount from him as well. So yeah, I definitely +1 that. In terms of, I would say to best answer the question that you asked, it depends where you are in your journey, right? There may be specific chapters that, you feel like, oh, I could really, brush up on this, or maybe I don't know a lot about this. And that I would recommend kind of picking and choosing like what you think is relevant. You still maybe could benefit a bit from reading some of the introductory stuff, just so you understand how I've framed the book a little bit more. But it's I would say for somebody that like, truly is like brand new to Drupal, I don't recommend just picking a chapter or two, because I feel like the comprehensiveness of the book is really designed to help somebody who might be completely new to anything Drupal related, and tremendously benefit, giving them the breadth of knowledge that I think could give them an effective starting point in Drupal. And so I would not recommend like picking and choosing in that regard. But I would say somebody that's already in Drupal in some capacity definitely might, benefit just from finding topics, finding chapters that might, that might serve them better. That's probably my best advice.
So your previous statement, like kind of make your own adventure, makes a lot more sense based on who you are and what you're looking for. Perfect.
That would be my best advice. Yeah.
Okay, one of the other questions we always ask authors right after they finish their book: are you going to write another book?
I am absolutely unmotivated right now to write another book. I think my immediate priority is kind of just giving myself a little bit of some downtime or reprieve from any extra commitments beyond my day-to-day, responsibilities.
Right.
It was surprising, I think, how much, it ended up like taking to do this.
Yeah.
And so yeah, my main priority right now is basically giving myself a break. Would I ever like roll out in the future, like writing another book? Even Matt Glomman and I have had a little like side chat about like how you can make editions of your book. Like, oh, would you make an edition for Drupal 11? Would you make a different
Yeah.
edition that cleans up editorial stuff, or injects different topics or whatever? I wouldn't say I would ever rule it out, but I definitely am not considering that anytime soon. I also sometimes, like, before I started writing the book, I would make like weekly learnings and I would post them on LinkedIn. And when I would do that, a lot of people like would approach me or message me and say, "Oh, those were really good. Like, you should kind of keep doing that," and was kind of motivating me to keep kind of sharing some of what I learned or some perspective I gained. I had at one point even thought about maybe converting that into a book. It would probably look a lot like a Rand's book, actually, like
Mhm.
very topical, very like sort of short, several page little clips of specific things,
Yeah.
but that would definitely come at a later day.
That's generally that's pretty close to what we hear right after somebody finished their first, especially their first book. Um,
It's not for
when
the
was
faint
this
of
book?
heart.
When was this book published, by the way?
I think the date was like December 15th, if I
Oh,
remember. So
so
it's
about
not
a month.
even a month old right now. Yeah.
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 So you can
Very
ask
cool.
him again in like another month or two if another book is on the horizon. You might have a different answer. So Adam, before we let you go, you talked about Simply Test Me a little bit earlier, and we'd love to hear a little bit of an update on Simply
Mhm.
Test Me and what's going on there.
I think we're at this stage, we're really reaping the benefits of a lot of the modernization effort that we went through that was extremely time consuming, and, it took a large investment of, Matt Glomman and me and several other contributors, that were involved in those efforts. We're a little slow on, sort of developing and continuing to sort of push that momentum, but we were pushing at a really aggressive pace before, namely because the old system was, kind of falling down, right?
Mhm.
So, so we had good reason, but we are continuing to kind of, keep it up to date and keep the system running and maintained. Rachel actually currently is even working to get the system updated for Drupal 10, which is
Mhm.
cool. So,
Okay.
and that'll include, probably helping make sure all the modules are up to snuff, all the dependencies, and get all the custom code sort of cleaned up in a way that will be deployable, and all the infrastructure up to the more modern versions of PHP and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, so like that's really the focus right now, I would say, for Simply Test. But I think we still are raising funds and doing things. I think 2024, I'm hoping we can get closer to developing more roadmap. Like maybe some things that come to mind there are more like better incorporation of like merge requests in Drupal.org, like being able to test those really easily and seamlessly.
Mhm.
Building an experience around that would be kind of cool. And there's a few more, like other one-click demos that we might want to build or things of that nature. So yeah, there's I think we're still keen to do that sort of stuff. Still keen to grow more people developing and contributing to it. I would love to see that flourish more, but as of now, like, we don't have tons of time. So it's like, trying to kind of just manage that, not overcommit. We don't want to burn out or do anything. So, we're in a good space right now where it's running well and people seem to be getting a lot of value out of it. So, we're sort of living in that mode right now.
Cool. Sounds good. That's a good mode to be living in, especially as you're writing a book. I imagine that's a good space. So, well, Adam, as always, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to the next book or the next update or whatever it might be.
Thank you so much for hosting me, and honestly, it's always a pleasure to be a part of this and to join and see some familiar faces and catch up a bit. So yeah, thank you so much for hosting me, and yeah, it's always a pleasure, really.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
And you can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the big Become a Patron button in the sidebar. Alrighty, we have made it to the end of our show. Adam, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, ask questions about the book, talk about Simply Test Me, or anything in general, how could they best do that?
Definitely on the Drupal.org Slack by Nerdstein. You can reach out. I'm also on Twitter, but Nerdstein was already taken, so there's a 3, so it's N3RDSTEIN. Yeah, and I don't know, I'm happy to engage in whatever way. I think those are, 2 good ways people typically reach out to me. And so, yeah, happy to connect in either of those forums. Probably less good with email and sort of, I know, I think it's kind of falling by the wayside, but people sometimes used to reach out over the contact form on like Drupal.org, but boy, that stuff just gets caught up in a big flurry of, email stuff. And sometimes I'm a little bit bad at responding in a timely fashion.
Slack's the way to go, it sounds like.
I love Slack. Yeah,
There
I'm
you
good at that. Yes.
All right. Nick, what about you?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org and Drupal Slack at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.